Hello and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 87, Tuesday, February 7th, 2023.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and...
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined, as always, by the toad to my Winnie Foster, my lovely co-host, Emily.
Hello, listeners. Hello, Courtney. We have a really great episode in store today. I've been very excited to cover this book on this podcast.
Yes, and I'm excited because we are bringing back guest readers. It has been basically a year since we've had a guest reader join us for an episode, so sorry about that. But we are excited to bring that back today as part of our 2023 season. At the end of last year, we guest starred on the Synergy Loves Company podcast to discuss Disney's connection to banned books, and host Eric is a school librarian whose favorite research subject is Disney, so we are so pleased to have him join us today to discuss the children's classic Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. Welcome, Eric.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be on the Book of the Mouse Club. It's like dreams come true here, right? I was excited to have you on my show, and now I'm excited to be here.
And it's so great to have you. We had so much fun talking. Listeners won't hear this on our episode with you, but we all talked for like another hour after we finished recording. So this was super fun for us to put together. And we would love to know a little bit more about Synergy Loves Company. So can you tell our listeners more about yourself and your podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So I am a school librarian, as you said in my little intro. Thanks for that. So I do love reading, of course, in books. So Book of the Mouse Club is one of those podcasts I gravitate towards. But the podcast I have is called Synergy Loves Company, subtitle How Disney Connects to Everything. And that's kind of the simple version of what it's about. It's all kind of Disney is kind of everywhere these days. I think everyone live, if you're listening to this, I'm sure your life is touched by Disney in some way, but it's everywhere out there. And there's just little ways, like when we looked at the banned books in our episode, or looking at Disney and heavy metal is one of the episodes I did in the past, or just Disney and Aerosmith. We kind of, I give two rock and roll versions of that. I'll throw another one I've done, Disney and Vincent Price is another one out there. So there's just kind of Disney plus whatever else that Disney's kind of had, touch its history and kind of explore that. I usually love to bring a guest on, or guests on, to talk about the two things, Disney and whatever else is we are talking about. But sometimes I have some solo episodes too. So it's just kind of finding those connections to Disney and everywhere else in the world. And yeah, I have fun doing it, and I have fun listening to podcasts like this too. So if you like listening to podcasts like this, definitely, give us a chance. Give me a chance there on Synergy Loves Company.
Well, we're so glad that the connection brought us together. And while I don't believe it was in the episode exactly, since Tuck Everlasting isn't necessarily a banned book, it does fall into, that children's classic and aligned with a lot of the books that we did discuss, like James and the Giant Peach or Bridge to Terabithia. So we thought, why not have you on to discuss the classic book as well as the 2002 film. So before we jump into that, we always like to give a little bit of background, and I will turn it over to Emily to give us some background on the book itself.
All right. So got my sources. I like to always cite my sources from an NPR interview, Macmillan Publishers website, as well as the book itself, because I have the 40th anniversary edition where she has included some information in an interview that was published. So that's where I got my sources here. So out of 20 books, Tuck Everlasting is Natalie Babbitt's 8th novel, and it was published in 1975 by Farrar, Straus and Giroux, which is a publishing house under Macmillan Publishers. And a little bit more about her, here is the author page from Macmillan Publishers' website. Quote, artist and writer Natalie Babbitt, from 1932 to 2016, is the award-winning author of the modern classic Tuck Everlasting and many other brilliantly original books for young people. As the mother of 3 small children, she began her career in 1966 by illustrating The 49th Magician, written by her husband, Samuel Babbitt. She soon tried her own hand at writing, publishing 2 picture books in verse. Her first novel, The Search for Delicious, was published in 1969 and established her reputation for creating magical tales with profound meaning. Neenoch Rise earned Babbitt a Newbery Honor in 1971, and she went on to write and often illustrate many more picture books, story collections, and novels. She also illustrated the 5 volumes in the small poem series by Valerie Worth. Born and raised in Ohio, Natalie Babbitt lived her adult life in the Northeast. End quote. In a 2015 interview with NPR about the book's 40th anniversary, Babbitt explained her inspiration for writing the story. Quote, Babbitt says she was inspired to write the book after a conversation she had with her young daughter. Internal quote, one day she had trouble sleeping, woke up crying from a nap, and we looked into it together as well as you can with a 4-year-old, and she was very scared about the idea of dying. And it seemed to me that this was the kind of thing you could be scared of for the rest of your life. And so I wanted to make sure that she would understand what it was more. And it seemed to me that I could write a story about how it's something that everyone has to do and it's not a bad thing, end quote. She also shared I have the 40th anniversary edition of the book, and there is an interview in here. So she also shared in this edition what also inspired her. This was a question from someone who wrote in, I guess, why did you choose to write about the idea of living forever? And her response was, the question of what it might be like to live forever is something that everyone thinks about. And I think you think about it more when you find out you can't do it. It's an idea that's been sitting around in my head for a lot of years. I think we shy away from writing about our own deaths, although we can write about others' deaths. I'm always surprised when people think that Tuck Everlasting is unusual, because I think it's the most usual question there is, end quote. So that's going to be our topic today. And this is what got Tuck Everlasting its renown. So back to that NPR interview, Babbitt explained she never wanted to shield young readers from death, which we can sometimes think is a heavy topic. But she wanted to do her best to write it in a way that didn't sink readers further into sorrow as they progressed through the story. She also thanks teachers for making Tuck Everlasting such a hit with young readers. It sold over 5 million copies worldwide, and its awards and recognitions include the Janusz Korczak Medal, the 1976 Christopher Award as Best Book for Young People. It was named an LAA Notable Book and included on the Hornbook Magazine fanfare list. In 2005, it was covered by Anita Silvey in the 100 Best Books for Children. And based on a 2007 online poll, the National Education Association listed it as one of its teachers' top 100 books for children. It was ranked number 16 among the top 100 chapter books of all time in 2012 survey published by the School Library Journal. And the Broadway musical received a Tony Award nomination for Greg Barnes in the category of Best Costume Design of a Musical for the 2015-2016 season. So speaking of that musical, Courtney and I were so blown away because I don't know how I missed that this became a musical almost 8 years ago. But since its publishing, Tuck Everlasting has been adapted into 2 films, one in 1981 distributed by One Pass Media, and then again in 2002 by Disney, which is what we will be comparing the book to on this episode. The book was also adapted into that onstage musical with music by Chris Miller, lyrics by Nathan Tyson, and book by Claudia Scheer and Tom Federal. The show had its off-Broadway run in Atlanta from January to February of 2015, and the show was performed on Broadway for only 1 month at the Broadhurst Theater from April 26 to May 29th, 2016. So that's a lot for a 140-page book. I think Tuck Everlasting has had a wonderful 47 years, and it's made quite a lasting impression on readers today. That's why we're talking about it. So before we get now into our discussion of the 2, Courtney, can you please give us some context of the film adaptation that we're going to be talking about today?
Absolutely. And as always, I love any excuse to consult our favorite resource, Disney A to Z. So here's the encyclopedia entry for the film. Quote, Tuck Everlasting film, teenager Winnie Foster longs for a life outside the control of her domineering mother, and when lost in the woods near her home, she happens upon Jesse Tuck, a boy unlike any she has ever met before. He and his family are kind and generous, and they immediately take her in as one of their own. However, the Tucks hold a powerful secret, that of immortality, and with the mysterious man in the yellow suit tracking them down, they fear that their world could end. Ultimately, Winnie must decide whether to return to her life or stay with her beloved Jesse and his family forever. Released on October 11th, 2002, directed by Jay Russell, stars Alexis Bledel, Winnie Foster, Ben Kingsley, Man in the Yellow Suit, Sissy Spacek as May Tuck, Amy Irving, Mother Foster, Victor Garber, Robert Foster, Jonathan Jackson, Jesse Tuck, Scott Bairstall, Miles Tuck, and William Hurt as Angus Tuck. The film was narrated by Elizabeth Shue. It runs at 90 minutes, based on the book by Natalie Babbitt, filmed in CinemaScope, and released on video in 2003. End quote.
And Courtney, you and I texting back and forth about this. Can you share the fun facts about this film in our home state of Maryland?
Absolutely. So for those that don't know, Emily does reside in Maryland now, but didn't necessarily grow up there. However, I was a lifelong Maryland resident up until my move to Florida in 2014. So I remember that this film made quite a splash because several scenes were filmed in Maryland. I will give us some more details on that later, but I think the majority of the movie was let's say 90% or so. So stay tuned because I'll let you know where you can visit some of those locations. But it was definitely a big deal in 2002 when that happened. Are we ready to move into the discussion?
Yes. Courtney, you're kicking us off.
Sure. Well, I had that experience with the movie, so I'd love to hear from each of you. What are your experiences with the book and the film prior to this discussion? Emily, why don't you kick us off?
So this was a book I was really excited for us to do. I first read this book in 7th grade. And like Natalie Babbitt said, how she thanked teachers for making this such a popular book. It was introduced to me by my English language teacher, Mrs. Roberts. I had a dual English language and reading teacher, Mrs. Roberts and Mrs. Leff. And 7th grade, I read so many great books that these teachers, I don't know if it was just the class I had, but they both trusted us with copies of their own books. And Mrs. Roberts, maybe it was her classroom copy, but she had one Tuck Everlasting who gave it to my friend Erica, who then gave it to Lindsay, who then passed it to me. And we just passed this book around between my English class, between a group of us. And it has stuck with me ever since. This is probably my 3rd or 4th time reading the book since 7th grade. So not one I've revisited super, super often, but probably more than average than most people revisit books. And I had to get my own copy. So I do have the 40th anniversary edition. And I just absolutely love the story and cannot wait to talk about it. So thanks, Mrs. Roberts. Erica, what about you?
I kind of have an completely opposite story to go with this one because I actually hadn't read the book until we read it together. I think I mentioned that when we were talking about when we were on kind of talking after recording the episode of Synergy Loves Company, and it was kind of like, well, we should read it together. I had seen the movie in high school, and I saw it for it being it was kind of like the romance movie that it was. It wasn't quite my thing, and it kind of made me kind of put off reading the book through college when I was having to read a lot more children's literature to become a teacher, and then even put it off when I was going back to school to become a librarian. So I don't know if that's a librarian sin there, but I hadn't read this book because I had seen the movie, and I decided from the movie that it wasn't quite my thing. So I'm really glad I read it, though, because I really enjoyed reading it.
It's never too late, and I'm sure now we have lots to discuss in regards to that. I will share, though, that mine experience was tied to the movie because my mom is now a retired teacher. She spent most of her career teaching kindergarten, but she first started as a 2nd grade teacher, and this is absolutely her favorite children's literature book, and she would read it to her class every year. So she taught 2nd grade. I came along, she did the stay-at-home mom thing for a bit, went back to teaching kindergarten, and when this movie came out, I was 10, so maybe a little past doing bedtime stories, but she was so excited, so we borrowed the book from the library and read a chapter or two each night in anticipation of the movie, because she was just so thrilled to see that it was being adapted to a film. So I remember, one, the excitement of it being filmed in Maryland that I shared before, and also my mom's excitement. But yeah, it's now been 20 years since I have read the book, so have not revisited as often as Emily did. So I guess I am somewhere in between the two of you. Eric reading it for the first time, Emily reading it for the third or fourth. This was my second with 2 decades in between.
So we have the full spectrum here.
I think so.
Yeah, and so like, if I can kind of talk too as a librarian, I kind of went through my school. And I think you both talked about teachers being the ones who kind of put this book out to you. I went through my school and checked classroom libraries for this book. I had a copy in my own library, which I wasn't sure if I did or not because it hasn't been checked out that much. And then we have a whole classroom set in like the book room, and that's where I got mine from. So it wasn't a circulating copy. And I realized the kids are not, it's not the one that like the kids are choosing for themselves, but we had some teachers in the past read it as a classroom book, and the kids all loved it when they did. So I do believe it is that book. Like when she thanks the teachers, there's something to that, because it's one of those books that maybe doesn't have the most glamorous looking cover. It's not part of a series. It's not the flashy thing that students are like really wanting to grab, but it is that book that I think they really appreciate when they get the chance to read it, or are some kids would say are forced to read it. So I think it's one of those that I think it sticks around for a reason. And it is those teachers that kind of champion it, and then the kids really love it.
So I want to pose something to you, Eric, since you have experience as a librarian and teaching literature to young readers. This was a question, again, in that 40th anniversary edition that has a published interview. Someone had asked Natalie Babbitt, why do you use such difficult vocabulary words in your books? And she says, quote, "They're the words that say what I wanted to say. Sometime during the last 40 years, people have decided that children can't understand any words that have more than 4 or 5 letters. That's just plain crazy. When I was in grammar school, my friends and I were no smarter than children are now, but our books did not fudge on vocabulary. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland would be considered hard now. There's no other way to enlarge our vocabularies. The more words you have at your disposal, the easier it is to say what you want to say specifically. Should we wait until high school to teach children words with more than one syllable? No, no, no." End quote. And I wanted to bring this up because, Courtney, you and I have talked about this when we reviewed like Mary Poppins and Winnie the Pooh, that these are books aimed for children that today maybe we don't automatically reach for. And Eric, I'd love to know your take on this as someone who has studied literature and teaching literature to an audience at this age level.
Yeah, no, and vocabulary is a big, that's a good point, because I'm going to get all teachery here. Sorry about
go.
That. Or you're welcome. No, as far as a vocabulary in books goes, I know a lot of teachers will have the leveled classroom libraries, and they'll be like, you got to pick from the bin that has your reading level. And don't go above it, don't go below it. But the truth is, if the material is something that the kids want to read, they're going to find a way to read it, even if there are bigger words in it. And it's actually going to work better in the end. It's going to give them the chance to learn those words in context, and see them in a place that they really actually want to read, instead of just sticking to the level that they're at. So I do think when we get authors that use words like this in vocabulary for really great stories that get kids really excited about them, then it kind of does the work for you as far as vocabulary. It exposes them to the vocabulary. So no, I think this is a great example of that. And plus, like we said, with teachers teaching this one as kind of a class book, that lends itself to, the lesson plan, adding the whole vocabulary lesson to it too, to get some of those bigger words. So I'm always like, no, like if I have a student come to my library and they want to choose a book that I know is way over their level, or whatever it was that had made them want to pick that book out, I usually ask them, like, why is it that you wanted that one? I had a student the other day, a first grader, pick out a really thick Wings of Fire dragon fantasy book, and he said he really liked the maps in the front. So I was just like, cool, like, take it, look at the maps, bring it back in a week, that's fine. Like, that doesn't bother me. I'd rather him have it, see something he liked about it in the book, and then bring it back. So it's like, no, the vocabulary, I think is a great thing that it's difficult, because it's a way to expose them to it. Sorry if I went on a librarian teacher rant there.
No, that is just the type of stuff that we are interested in here. We've brought you to the right place.
All right, so to like keep going on with our conversation, I want to know, what are your favorite parts of this book? Do you have a favorite character, a favorite scene, a favorite like theme going on through the story? What did you guys see in there that you really liked?
Yeah, I think as a kid, my favorite character was Winnie Foster because, of course, I was a 10-year-old and in the book, so so was she. But reading it this time around, I feel that I was really drawn to May Tuck, the mother character, and maybe that's because we'll get into some of the differences. I feel like she has more character development and is more fleshed out in the book here. So I would call her my favorite character this time around, and we're getting into spoiler territory. I don't know that we put that out there, but this will be a spoiler-filled podcast if you have not read. It takes like an hour and a half.
From 1975.
You had time. Also, it's 140
Yes.
pages, so like you could honestly read the book in the same time it takes to watch the movie. Like that's just, a solid 3 hours of your day right there. I liked in the book how Winnie Foster helps them escape, or helps May escape from jail by disguising herself. I just thought that was a very fun, like, climax portion of the book. What about y'all?
I'd have to say probably the same. When I first read the story back in 7th grade, I loved Winnie Foster. I think it also lends itself well, at least in the book. We could talk about favorites in the movie, but in the book, since it's told from a first-person perspective, I think we only leave Winnie's perspective for like 2 or 3 chapters, and they're very short. They're like 2-paragraph kind of chapters, just so you know what's going on outside the Tuck. So you spend so much time with Winnie that it's kind of hard to really get to know anyone else. But I'd have to agree that as I've gotten older, I've gravitated towards more of the Tucks, and I love May's character, but I think I've been more intrigued, at least this reading around and going back to the film, with Miles' character. Just because he has such a different, he and Jesse are the complete opposites of how they feel about their predicament of being immortal. And I think as we're growing up, or as we're younger, we lean more towards Jesse. But as we're getting older, like, I'm starting to understand Miles a lot more as well. So I found him really intriguing this time around. As for a scene, I'd have to say the same. Like, the action sequence of getting May out of the gallows before. And it's so funny because that scene, like, you'd think, like, we need to help her escape or she's going to die. But it's such a interesting thing that since she can't die, like, the big stake is actually them, other people finding out they're immortal, not so much the, like, what you would think of help someone escape before they're sent to the gallows because you don't want them to die. It's the complete opposite reason. So I found that so intriguing as a kid, and I still find that intriguing now. What about you, Eric?
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree with you about the different characters. Now, like I said, I read this for the first time for this, but I really could see how each of the Tucks, like, they're frozen in time, but they represent different stages in life, and kind of how you would approach that immortality at those different stages of life. So I kind of saw that as they were kind of different, different perspectives on this same take. In the same way, Winnie represents something different to each of them, as they kind of mourn their lives, even though they're immortal. Where, Winnie is more of a daughter to Miles, and, kind of a love interest to Jesse. And then the parents kind of, the older Tucks see her maybe as a child also, but kind of just as like that like youthful, she's got her whole life ahead of her. And even though they have this weird unlife ahead of them, she's like the hope that they see, that they're trying to protect, like the world from the spring. So I really liked how those characters kind of have those different kind of stages in how you would see this immortality. My favorite scene in the whole book is the kidnapping scene, because I thought it was hilarious. Not like haha side splitting hilarious, but like kind of like funny, strange, awkward hilarious, where they're kidnapping her, but they're like, we don't know how to kidnap someone. And she's like, I don't know what to do. Am I being kidnapped? And it's just like everyone's confused. They have that, close call, which ends up being even closer than they thought with the man in the yellow suit. But I just found that scene in the book really, really great. I smiled for a lot of it. And it's weird because I'm describing a kidnapping scene as me like really enjoying it and smiling, but it's funny in a weird way.
No,
Yeah.
I absolutely get it.
Winnie going, I was thinking of running away today anyway. I guess this is
Right.
okay. And now I'm not alone. Like, okay, but technically you're being kidnapped.
Yeah.
Which is something that definitely differed from how it plays out in the film. So I think we're going to spend a bit of time here, but I would love to discuss the major differences between the book and the film, and discuss maybe whether we feel that those differences plussed the story or detracted from it. I know we probably all have a long list. Maybe we can each take a few so that there's something left for everyone here, but I will turn it over to Emily to start.
So yeah, it's interesting that there's quite a few differences between the book and the film, but at the same time, it's almost not as different. Like for instance, I watched the film first and then read the book again, and a lot of the dialogue is almost verbatim out of the book into the film. The sequence of events is the same. Like the villains are all there. Like no one changes character, but there are some elements that do shift. And I think the biggest change that I want to discuss first before we get into some others is Winnie. In the book, Winnie is 10 years old going on 11, but in the film, she's like 15 or 16 going on 16, going on 17, something like that. She's either 15 going on 16 or 16 going on 17.
She's 15.
She's much closer in age to Jessie. And this is going to be, I'm going to tip my hand here a little bit. I think it was a good change because maybe it's the romantic in me or something, but I think it upped the stakes for Winnie a little bit more, the urgency of making this decision of do I want to be immortal or not. And I think with that age difference, or changing her age, being closer to Jessie in the film, we could lean on that romance aspect a little bit more versus she had a childhood crush on like, this guy's really sweet and really nice to me. And I think we could be friends. Like it's that 10-year-old kind of crush where you just like getting the attention from this person.
Or like you have a crush on your friend's older brother or something,
right,
like from a distance.
Whereas I think changing her age to be a little bit older plussed it for me because I think we all, again, those stakes are just higher for Winnie. In the book, we kind of get as an afterthought, like why it's just like, I want to run away today, but we don't know why off the bat other than like, yeah, every kid thinks about it now and then. And we hear from her down the road in the book that at home, everything's pretty straight-laced and her mother and grandmother are all about the domestic female duties. But I think in the film, they really do a good job of establishing that she is very uncomfortable in the life that her mom and grandmother have made. And she's getting pushed towards finishing school and thinking about marriage. And I think that urgency with the age and then bringing in Jessie, that conflict she has about, do I want to grow up in this world or that world, I think is just a greater, it just has a lot more weight to it to me. So I thought that was a good change. Sorry, that was a long explanation.
No, I feel like it's the major one for sure.
That is the major one. And that one, I didn't know how I felt about it, I'll say, because I did love I do love in the book, like I said earlier, with the different characters where each character, she means something different to each of the Tucks. And when she is almost the same age as Jessie, it makes it so much about that romantic relationship, which wasn't the part that I really gravitated towards myself, not being the biggest romance reader. It's not the part I gravitated towards as a reader, but I do understand the importance of using that in the movie to make it a cleaner movie plot versus you couldn't pull all that other kind of stuff in the book from the book into the movie and make it as clean of a for the screen. So I do think I'll agree with you that it plussed it, but I won't say that it was my favorite thing to take from the book because I do miss some of the other stuff. But no, I'll agree that did plus it up. But I really loved that when they go to find Winnie from the Tucks, there's a larger search party and even a larger search endeavor earlier that we see. Because in the book, it just kind of seems like the family looked around a little bit. It didn't seem as urgent to me, at least, that they were looking for Winnie Foster as she goes missing. And they kind of show a bigger like turnout from the town of people coming out to find her. And like the town becomes more of a character that we totally don't even get in the book.
Yeah, I feel they opened up the movie in ways that I was okay with. I did want to circle back to the Winnie piece because I feel when I saw it when I was 10, I was maybe a little disappointed that they aged her up because, again, I saw Winnie as my contemporary at that age. And I'm like, oh, now it's a love plot when it's not really a love story as Emily described in the book. It's more like she has a little crush and then Jesse sees an opportunity. I wouldn't say like he has a crush on her because again he's 17 and she's 10, but more like, oh, now you know our secret. It would be really great to have somebody that I could have, you know, stay the same age with me forever. So he instructs her when she's 17 to drink the water from the spring. I think, you know, especially having seen the heartbreak that Miles went through, having married and had kids, but never aging, and then his wife leaving him. But now revisiting it, I was like, you know what? I get it from a marketing standpoint. As you said, Eric, it cleans it up, streamlines it a bit. And I was like, I can buy into this decision now. That makes sense from a marketability. Like, let's make it a romance. So I was ultimately surprisingly okay with it because I am one who sometimes takes umbrage when source material is changed. But I did feel like the changes that were made here for the most part work. But there were some pretty somewhat random or surprising changes. One that I was alluding to in the kidnapping scene that you mentioned. I want to hone in on that one. The family, it's more in the book, she's at the spring, she wants to drink from it, and Jesse tries to stop her. The rest of the family, well, minus the father, Tuck, stumble upon her and they're like, oh gosh, what do we do? Now she knows, we gotta go. In this one, it's definitely more dramatic because Jesse and Miles, only the two brothers, are kidnapping her, and it's very cinematic. Like he scoops her up on a horse and is running away with her. So from a cinema standpoint, I get that, but I was like, oh nope, that was not how it was in the book.
Well, I think that also plays, like I said, how I started gravitating towards Miles' character. I think that also maybe more so Miles in the movie is much more serious than he is in the book, which that's not to say he's not serious in the book. He's still always more serious than Jesse, but I think he's more grim.
We see more conflict from him for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot more conflict between him and Jesse. Like I think so something that also was different was how Winnie hears the story. So in the book, she hears about it almost immediately from the Tucks. When she gets there, they're like, we have to tell you the story. And they're like not apprehensive about sharing this, maybe because they know their situation. But in the film, it takes a little bit of time for this to come out. They try to like calm her and be like, hey, let's have a family dinner. We're not trying to hurt you. We do need to talk to you about something. But they kind of build up to it. And she spends time with Jesse and starts to kind of feel comfortable with the family. And then one night after they go swimming and she literally lets her hair down. Like you start to see her character unravel from like her mother's world. It's the 1890s in the film. It's the 1870s in the book. So we're in that Gilded Age era, and like she takes her corset off. Like that becomes a whole thing in the film. And then when they're around the fire and Jesse's breaking into her like, no, really, I'm 104 years old. Miles kind of comes out of nowhere, and his story and the way he delivers it in the film is a lot more dramatic and heartbreaking. Like Winnie like starts crying hearing his story. And you could tell that she's already starting that conflict. Whereas I think in the book, that conflict doesn't really hit her until she talks to Tuck.
Yeah, I feel they really fleshed out Miles' character, but maybe to the detriment of May Tuck, which is what I was alluding to earlier. May Tuck felt way more central to me in the book, but I felt she took a backseat to both brothers in the film. Did anyone else feel that way?
Definitely. She has got that. She's essentially the one who does the kidnapping in the book, because she wants to bring Winnie home to Angus Tuck. And like figure it all out as a family. She's kind of always leading the way in the book. And yeah, I think, like you said, they wanted to kind of have the two opposing sides in the brothers and kind of focus on that. And Miles does get real dark compared to in the book, which I would have liked, like you said, I would have liked to seen more Maytuck and maybe a less darkness from Miles.
One last difference I kind of want to touch on is the man in the yellow suit. His character stays, I think, pretty consistent, but we get more of him in the film. He's another character. I think using the film, they get to do what films do best, which is you can switch scenes very quickly. And so you can get a more omniscient perspective of the whole story versus just following Winnie's character in the book. But he has a little bit more of a backstory of coming to the town. We see him checking all the gravestones. Like, we don't learn till much later in the book of his motivations for finding the Tucks. And it's kind of like, oh, and I got your wood, your forest. Thank you so much. This was a great, but we got to see the conflict between Winnie's family and turning to him for help. And he's a little slimier in the movie for me.
Slimy is a good word for it.
Yeah, I thought he was a slimier villain in the film versus the book. I thought he was stronger in the film.
It's funny because I didn't remember much about the movie, and obviously when I was reading it, I reread the book first and then watched the movie. I wasn't going to picture Alexis Bledel as Winnie because I was like, you're not 10, you're like 18 maybe, playing 15. But for the man in the yellow suit, I absolutely pictured Ben Kingsley because I just remembered him vividly from seeing the film 20 years ago. And they give him more of a backstory in that he's been following both of the brothers around, like chasing them on a train and some crazy stuff there.
Yeah, he has a very I don't know, almost like a vampire hunter kind of air about him, that he's like trying to hunt them down and get rid of them, and it is more intense for sure.
They did keep both in the book and in the film that he does not have a name. He is the man in the yellow suit. And in the interview I read, Natalie Babbitt said when she talked to school children about, villains and if you met a stranger, she said it seemed more mysterious and spooky if he didn't have a name. That era of like, he is a stranger, that stranger danger stays there if you don't have a name for him. So I thought that was interesting too. And that stayed consistent. We never learn his name. So going off on differences, we're going to jump here for a second. Talking about the ending is the same.
But
so
different.
Spoiler alert, everybody. Winifred doesn't drink the water. She does live her life and passes in a natural death. Her gravestone at the end says, Winifred Foster Jackson, beloved mother, wife, and then her years. So she doesn't drink, but the ending is a little different. In the book, it ends in 1950. So we still get like a full age time pass, but it's 1950. Whereas in the film, it's like 2002, 2003, like present day. And I think in the film, she lived longer. In the film, she lived 100 years.
Yes.
Whereas in the book, she lived like 80 or 75 years.
Somewhere between 80 and 90.
Yeah, like with the life expectancy, I think we would expect. Whereas in the film, she lived a little longer than normal life expectancy. But we have different characters who discover this. So in the book, Maytuck and Tuck discover her gravestone, her passing, and she's buried in a cemetery. But in the film, Jessie goes back to Tree Gap to find her, and she is buried with her headstone above the spring under the Tuck tree. So I wanted to know, did we have an ending we preferred better?
I will say I do, like, I understand the poetry of the movie's ending, and as far as where her headstone is, but I do like the idea when the Tucks come back it's the 1950s, and the spring in the tree and everything has just been leveled and turned kind of into, the sprawling Tree Gap town kind of just pushing out, as we would have seen that was happening. It's kind of like it wasn't there, and they have this feeling they want closure to know if Winnie ever did drink the water or if she was still around, and they kind of assume that she doesn't, and then they find her headstone in the cemetery where the rest of her family would be, and it just kind of I kind of like that because it felt like, yeah, that's kind of how it would have happened. That's my personal take on it.
Eric, I'm completely with you. I am team book ending. I felt that I liked that it was May and Angus Tuck coming back for her, because it gives me the impression that, Jesse moved on with his rest of his forever life. He hasn't been spent like 100 years hung up on this one woman. He's like, all right, well, I guess she didn't take the bottle. That's fine. I'm going to go out. I'm sure, they kind of allude to that she meant something important to him, but clearly they got on with their lives. And I agree that it's a natural progression that the spring would have been bulldozed. Nobody really knew that this special resource was here, and they continued to build. But now the Tucks don't have to worry about anybody else finding the spring or encountering the trouble that they've had with this immortality. So I liked it better that it was the parents. Again, like you, I get it for, it's a love story of the movie, which I was okay with. But ultimately, I felt the book was better. And there was a kind of somberness that I feel like, well, maybe this is also in the time frame of the movie, but like they essentially comment that they had just missed her by like 2 years. Like she had died in, I believe, I don't have the book in front of me because my
1948.
I was gonna say 1948, and it's 1950, and they're like, oh, like we just missed her kind of thing, but implies that she lived a nice full life. And also the toad. I love the toad, y'all. We didn't talk about the toad.
Yeah, the toad's not as big in the film.
No.
But the toad's still there in the film, which is kind of like it was kind of left over but not fully explained.
The toad is such a presence in the book. So for those who are unfamiliar, the book essentially opens with Winnie talking to a toad in her yard. She becomes rather attached to it. A dog comes after it at one point, and so the bottle that Jesse has given her to take in 7 years when she turns 17, that will give her this immortality, she gives to the toad. And so the ending is like, and watch out for that toad, like about to get run over by a car. But I believe they make the quip like, poor toad thinks he's gonna live forever or something along those lines. I was like, it's funny because he is gonna live forever. So that's two of us for book. What about you, Emily?
I'm going to be the rebel on this one. I'm tipping my hand here of which one I prefer. I do love the book ending. I think to me they stand out different enough that they can stand on their own as is. I've always also been someone that when people are like, I hate the movie, it didn't do justice to the book, I have always been someone who can separate the book and the films when I watch things. Like, yes, there might be things I'm disappointed about, but I don't take it personally to the book. If I'm entertained and I had a good time, then it sticks with me and it can do as it is. But I like the film's ending, and I'm rating this on how much I cry at the end, because I cry at the end of this book every time, which think what you will on that one. But I get like a small like misty tear on the book, and I get very, very emotional at the end of the film. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's just because I do like that romance edge. I like what that did to Winnie's character. Again, to me, it just made it, her and Jesse's story in the film, I think made it more, like I said before, urgent and had more weight to her decision for me. So for me, the ending where Jesse finds her and the line where I will love you, Winnie Foster, till the day I die, after they break May out, like for me, it just made it more emotional. I do love the ending though with the toad. I do wish they used the toad a lot more in the film.
That, can I rechange my favorite character? My favorite character is the toad.
Right.
We stand the toad, who is still hopping around Havre de Grace somewhere.
Yeah. No, that's the toad is really, I feel like they missed an opportunity there in the movie to kind of have that toad come back somehow at the end.
Speaking of the toad, Courtney, this is how you and I found out that this was a Broadway musical, which for someone who loves Broadway as much as I do, I don't know how I missed.
Okay, well, it only ran for a month, so don't blame yourself there.
A week ago, I went to the Museum of Broadway on 45th Street in New York City. And at the end of the museum, which I highly recommend to everyone, They just have like this wall of props from a lot of different shows, and it's fun. Like they have the boots from Kinky Boots. They have Patti LuPone's glass from Company. Like it's a bundle of
That's
newspapers from Newsies. Like it's a lot of some of those small props, but are just really fun. And then there was a toad, and I looked at it. It said from Tuck Everlasting 2016, and I was like, Courtney, what? This is a Broadway show. But the toad made it into the stage show as a prop. So the toad made it.
It has to. It's an important character.
I wonder how because it was a musical, right?
Yeah.
Now
I want to find this.
The music is on Apple Podcasts or on Apple Music.
Okay.
I haven't listened to it yet, but I did go find it. I was curious.
Nice. It's out there.
Yes, so it does exist and it is available.
Awesome sauce. Put it on the next to listen to list. All right. So let's get into the theme a little bit with the story. So there's a lot of different kind of stories and genres and where we could try to fit the movie in the book. But what kind of genre do you think this is a Peter Pan-like story, or is there some other genre or retelling kind of area that we could fit this into better? Courtney, what do you think?
So I don't know that I can call it a Peter Pan story, but in full transparency, I have not read Peter Pan. Definitely somewhere on our list to do for this podcast at some point. So my experience is the Disney film and like the Mary Martin musical, but I don't know if I would necessarily call it Peter Pan, because to me, Peter Pan is about not growing up, but not necessarily about immortality per se. And I mean, immortality is definitely not addressed in either of those two works. I don't know if that is a part of the J.M. Barrie story. So I saw it more as like immortality and weighing like what would you choose. I mean, I guess, you know, Wendy kind of has to choose whether she's going to stay in Neverland, but that did not immediately come to mind for me. I'm curious to hear what Emily thinks, because I know you are a much bigger Peter Pan fan than I.
I am. And I will say it has been a while since I've read the original Peter Pan. I have read it. I read it back in college. So it's been about 8 to 10 years since I touched the original text. But to me, it did kind of jump out a little bit like a Peter Pan story. I agree with you that Peter Pan, we don't really tackle the immortality or the death aspect. But I think Winnie has the same conflict as Wendy. At least posed to her, maybe we could say posed to her both in the book and in the film. And Wendy is closer, I think, to Winnie's age in the book. More of that, like 10 years old. She's going to be moved out of the nursery. And Winnie does talk about in the book that her mom and her grandmother are starting to put more of those domestic womanly duties on her. And I think how Winnie in the book especially sees Jessie is almost like a Peter Pan. Here is a life that I want to hang on to, the fun. I want freedom. I don't want to live in society's constraints. And I see that as the Peter Pan thing when she's making this conflict. And she has to go through that same decision in Peter Pan or Wendy has to go through that same decision as Winnie does of, do I go back to the life that was set before me, or do I make this dramatic shift to something else, but at what cost? Like there is a cost to it. It's either immortality, you'll never die, or you'll never grow up and you have to stay in Neverland. Like there's a cost to it, but there's something alluring there. So to me, I saw it like a Peter Pan story. I think it moves it further because we're adding the theme of death in there as well. It's not just never grow up and you get to be a kid. It's never grow up and never die. It's a little bit further, I think. But I saw kind of a similarity between Winnie and Wendy and Jessie and Peter.
I have kind of an outside, like maybe tell me if I'm way off. I got two things. The first one is when I was reading this and I like saw the Tucks and how they had their secret and they were bringing Winnie in, I got Twilight vibes. I'm not going to lie. Because you get that idea of like Edward's family of the vampires and Bella comes in and she's the outsider and she wants to be part of it, but she doesn't want to be part of it. In that first Twilight book.
Yeah, she wants to have her cake and eat it too. Like...
Exactly. And I for sure that I did. it just popped into my head as I was reading it, especially because the way that the family is. But then also in the movie, you get that love story, which is very Twilighty. But I also, my other thing that I thought of as I was kind of thinking about where I'd like to see this fit in, it wasn't as much of like what kind of story. I just kind of had the wish. I wish I could have seen like the 1960s Haley Mills version of a Disney film of Tuck Everlasting. Of course, it's impossible because the book never didn't come out till the 70s. But I just wonder what would have happened with the studio in the 60s if that would have happened. Of course, I cast Haley Mills in it because she would be the one. But yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I could see that for sure.
I
Yeah.
love that.
No,
Yeah,
I would love to
it's
see that.
This is a very Haley Mills film. Like, I'm a big Annette Funicello fan as well, but no, this would have gone to Haley. Very fun observation.
So the other theme of this story is coping with death, which again I thought was so interesting. One, her inspiration from her having a conversation with her 4-year-old about death, but also that she wants to tackle these big themes with young readers. And death is dealt with in a couple different ways. We have death due to age, like Miles' family, they grew up and passed of natural age. We have death from murder. The man in the yellow suit dies because May hits him over the head to stop him from taking Winnie and covering their secret. We have death at the sense that they want to kill, or they want to put May Tuck to death for reasons of justice. In the film, we also see Winnie's grandmother pass away, and that's a pivotal moment for Winnie of contemplating death when she goes home, of seeing her grandmother's illness. So kind of like what you said with the Tucks, how we have different stages of life, we also have very different stages of death or types of death as well. So I wanted to ask, like, what did you all think about how death is explored in this book, and something that stood out to you?
So specifically in the book, one thing I do love about how it explores death, with her purposes being to write a book about death for children, essentially, that doesn't get too gory or, sad, or just kind of to explore the theme and concept of death, is it has a feel of a little story about a big concept. And I think that's why she probably doesn't include the whole town, and she doesn't bring in a bunch of extra characters, and kind of keeps it that core small group of characters. Even at the beginning, when she kind of has in the prologue, she kind of says like these 3 random things were all happening at the same time, like setting up a coincidence where it's kind of like we don't always have to understand why it came together the way it did. Sometimes it happens that way, but it kind of has the feel of a little story about a big concept. And that I really love about how she goes into it. Because when you're teaching this to a class or, handing it to a child to read, it's like one of those things that you're probably going to get questions. And she kind of like mutes all the outside stuff and lets you just focus on that story.
Yeah, I found it to be in a format that was very approachable for children, but still realistic. It doesn't try to shy away from anything, as you said.
I really love how she delivered that message. So that's the big scene with Winnie and Tuck in the rowboat, which is like kind of the climax. And after that, that's where we get into the man in the yellow suit finding her and having to break May out of prison. But that's kind of the pinnacle of him telling her how life and death is like a wheel, like a water wheel. Everyone gets on the wheel and eventually you have to get off the wheel and make space. And I love in the book how Winnie then, we get examples of that. I think the speech he gives is almost verbatim from the book into the film. But then in the book, something we do get is her then looking at like an insect, and then she goes fishing with Miles, and she's really thinking about, normally I'd smack this mosquito, but what's his role, this mosquito's role in the wheel? Or yes, sometimes we have to kill our food. That's how we eat it. And that's, fish or livestock and whatever. But she starts grappling with that too. And I really like how she laid that out with something that is that can be grasped by everyone. But that was a scene that still sticks with me since 7th grade. When I think about death, I do think about that scene a lot, of how death is explained and how it's the circle of life, if you will, to bring it back to Disney. I thought she did that so well.
I've looked up the Broadway show because it is on Spotify as well for Team Spotify
Nice.
over here. And the finale song is called The Wheel. So they definitely leaned into that for sure. I'm looking forward to giving this a listen afterwards.
Right?
Well, as we somewhat wrap up here, I know we have a little more to go through. I think our big question, though, is overall, which did each of us prefer, the book or the film? Emily, you have tipped your hand quite a bit. Would you like to go first?
I will. And this is where I'm going to get so much flack from readers because I am normally the person who is book over film. But this is one of those rare instances for me where I think those pluses that Disney made, particularly with Winnie's age and the backstory of the man in the yellow suit and that little bit more to Miles, for me, really drove the urgency and weight of the story more so. And that does it for me. To defend, I do still give the book 5 stars on Goodreads. The fact that I've read this book 4 times and I know exactly who gave it to me, as from my Mrs. Roberts' 7th grade teacher, and that I attribute that this is a book that made me a reader. That time for me between 5th and 7th grade is what made me a reader, and I attribute this book so much to that. So while I do prefer the film for those tweaks, I still give this book 5 stars and will read it again.
I think, I'm going to go the opposite, of course. I'm going to say I do love the book more, but I will say I think even as we've had this conversation, Emily, I think you helped grow the movie on me, because there were things that I liked about the movie, and it's different, of course, but it's not like they totally changed it, or like we've said, it's the similar story. It's a great movie to watch. I do prefer the book, but I think that, like I said, you sold me on it a little more. I think I like the movie better now than before we started talking because of Emily's championing of it.
Yeah, I feel it's a comforting film. Thinking about the state of the movie industry today, everything's striving to be a blockbuster. This film made me nostalgic for kind of the era of the early 2000s. Even the 80s, Michael Eisner is on record saying, we don't need to always hit home runs. Sometimes you need to hit some singles and doubles, meaning smaller budget films that still turn a profit. And I don't know, just the early 2000s, things like Freaky Friday and not a Disney film, but a Cinderella story, like movies that you would watch at a sleepover. Like, I feel like we're missing that demographic or genre now. So I will say the film is comforting. It has its merits. I enjoyed revisiting it, but ultimately, like you, Eric, I'm going to give it to the book because it is just such a very sweet story, an easy read, and it was a lot of fun for me to revisit it as well.
So that being said, the hard question that Winnie had to face, I'm going to pose to us, which I know is not going to be easy to answer, or maybe it is. But would you have drunk from the spring?
I'm going to go. And I was going to say, I think I have an easy answer, but then I'll complicate it, of course. Right now, I would say, no, I would not have drunk from the spring. Never. But that's not to say that I think at other times in my life, I would have had more of a want to do it. And who knows, maybe later there will be times in my life where I feel like, if I just had that spring. So I do think it is really maybe, let's say, where you are on the wheel, as to, thinking about if you would drink from the spring and have that immortality or not. But right now, I can tell you right now, I don't think I would do it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the book shows that in the film, it sounds really alluring. That's what the man in the yellow suit is chasing, like, oh, we can sell this and profit off of it. And isn't this great? But the Tucks have been that way for 80 some years. They're like, oh, maybe it's not so great. And so I took their advice to heart, and I would not. I think, like Angus Tuck, he's kind of like, I'm just ready to rest at this point. Yeah. That would be me by a certain age.
I think I agree with both of you. I think there are points in life where even moving forward, where I might be like, I really would love to have that immortality, like especially being in this age where like you want to travel the world, you want to see things, and you don't have enough time or enough money or resources, or whatever, to see or do everything you want in one lifetime. So like it is super alluring. And like Natalie said, that I read earlier, that when you know it's not an option, you kind of crave it more. But if given the option, and again, what the man in the yellow suit is pushing and marketing, like knowing that that is most likely going to be what would happen given the world we're in now. I mean, look at any film that has the Fountain of Youth. Pirates 4, 5, whichever one it was.
Yeah.
Like that's always the story of the Fountain of Youth, is it's going to be manipulated for the worst purposes. And I would be with the Tux on defending the secret.
I have another question now that we're talking about drinking from the spring, because of course my crazy Disney brain, like the rest of us all have. So we see the Tux in the book. We see the Tux living for 80 years before they meet Winnie Foster, seeing all the changes that happen throughout time. And then we see him again in the 1950s going back to Tree Gap. And it made me wonder, do you think the family from the Carousel of Progress drank from the spring?
I absolutely love this question, and I have thought deeply about it because I saw it in our little planning document and I laughed out loud at it. The family of the Carousel of Progress, and if anyone for some reason is not familiar with this Walt Disney World attraction and 1964 World's Fair original, it shows a family progressing through the early 1900s, 1920s, 1940s, originally the 1960s, but now present day essentially. And they all have the same names still. I love that because my brain, I have so many questions about the Carousel of Progress family. Like, are they supposed to be the same people? People say different things. What happens to the little girl doing the laundry? She's like the cat, maybe, from Tuck Everlasting, who didn't drink from the spring and just disappears by Act 2. I think I ultimately have to say no, because the boy, I want to say his name's Jimmy, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah. He is different by the end of the scene. So
true,
Patricia,
he's older.
Yeah, Patricia stays the same, but I don't know. So maybe Patricia and the dad and mom did, but he definitely didn't, because all of a sudden he's a teenager in Act 4. But I love that your brain went here.
Yeah.
Maybe he's not allowed to drink from it yet.
Oh, they're waiting. That's fair.
Emily was thinking like me. I was like, maybe they discovered the spring after the first scene and he'd grown up a little bit.
Yeah. They're like, okay, now it's your turn. But they weren't able to give it to the girl.
Yeah, I was going to say, Courtney, your favorite part. What happened to the younger sister?
What happened to the girl? She's there helping laundry in Act 1, and then you never see her again. Also, Patty's hair changes color, and I'm just like, oh, okay. So many questions about Carousel of Progress. That could be its own book for sure.
Right.
But thank you for taking us there.
So something we often end our episodes with, if we had the chance to do an author interview, we would often ask the author about their advice to upcoming writers or their favorite books. While this is a guest feature episode, I did find her answers to those questions. Again, the 40th anniversary edition is just a treasure trove with this interview. I've referenced it so many times. But she did answer those two questions. So I thought, because we normally talk about those on the show if we have an author, unfortunately, we could never interview Natalie Babbitt. She passed in 2016.
She didn't drink from the spring.
She didn't. And she said she wouldn't. In this interview, someone asked her, would she have drunk from the spring? And she said no. Winnie is very much, she and Winnie are very much similar people, and she does not want to live forever. So she does answer those two questions. What is her favorite book? We're going to tweak this a little bit. It's not her favorite Disney book, but it is Disney adjacent. What is her favorite book? And then also what advice she has to young writers. So first, her advice suggestion for someone who wants to start writing, she says, quote, "Be a reader. It's the only real way to learn how to tell a story. All of us are storytellers of one kind or another, and I wish you all lots of luck if you choose to do it." That's advice we've heard before, is be a reader, from several of the authors we've had. So look at her award-winning books. The credit just stands, be a reader. And then finally, what is her favorite book? So two questions. Did you have a favorite book when you were younger? And she answered, quote, I think my favorite books were Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. I loved them because they didn't have any lessons to teach, end quote, which I thought was fun. And then they asked why it was her favorite book, and she said, the pictures were beautiful and funny at the same time, which was relatively unusual. They were in black and white, which is what I decided I would always do, though now I've branched out into color. It seemed to me the perfect children's book, but children either love it or hate it. I couldn't wait to read it to my own kids, and none of them liked it, end quote. So I liked her responses there because Alice in Wonderland is Disney adjacent. We have not covered it yet, but it will come eventually. That one's we're waiting for a good time to do that one. And I like that it's kind of her response here kind of brings together both of her roles as both an illustrator and an author, that she does both, that she liked Alice in Wonderland for both of those reasons, for the story and the illustrations. So if you enjoyed Tuck Everlasting like we did, as always, we'd love to leave you all with additional resources, and we've got some fun ones. So Courtney, why don't you start us off? Tell us about Maryland.
Yes, so I'm coming through on my promise here. As I shared earlier, most of the film was shot in my hometown of Maryland. The iconic, air quote, Eiffel Tower shot overlooking that gorgeous view can be found during your own hiking adventure. The rock formation is called the King and Queen's Seat and can be found at Rock State Park in Jarrettsville, Maryland. And the waterfall scene was filmed at the nearby Kilgore Falls. Additionally, Berlin, Maryland served as the fictional town of Tree Gap. And I would not advocate for going to anyone's private property, but my fun little connection is that I am from a very small town in Maryland called Havre de Grace, and that is where the Fosters' home was filmed. So you can look it up on Zillow for fun. The paint and stuff has changed, but definitely would not advise going to somebody's private property. But lots of fun Maryland connections, so definitely check out Berlin, Maryland for that main street of Tree Gap, as well as some hiking adventures and the beautiful scenery.
So what I want to recommend is a book I actually read this past year, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I read it as part of, it was an add-on for me for Book of the Month Club this past year, but I think it was in the 2020 Book of the Month lineup, and it had, it either won Book of the Year or it was a nomination for Book of the Year for Book of the Month. And I loved this book. I think it was my favorite book I read last year. It has very similar themes. The main character makes a deal with the devil for immortality without really recognizing what she was getting into. Again, that idea of deal with the devil, it's all in the details. And he found a lot of loopholes in the deal they made. So she has to grapple with immortality in the life that she ultimately chose for herself, and we follow that character's 300-year lifespan grappling with that decision. So to me, it had similar themes of Tuck Everlasting, but we kind of get to go down the road of the character did pick immortality and what are the repercussions of that. So for me, it had that same feel, but more for an adult audience.
I also have a pick that's more for an adult audience, and this is The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, and she writes it's not an immortality story. I'll start with that. But it focuses on Henry DeTamble, who happens to be a librarian, which is one of the reasons I do love this book. But I love it for so many other reasons. He's a librarian in Chicago. That's similar to me. But anyways, he involuntarily travels through time. He kind of is, I would say he's like unstuck in time. He'll just appear at different times in his life. It could be when he's a kid, he's there, he shows up as an adult, he disappears from his adult life at that time. And it's all about the romance with his wife, Claire, who he has been visiting since she was a child. And I think that's where I've got the kind of similar feeling connection when I was thinking about Tuck Everlasting, because you have this, it's kind of like the romance story that you might be looking for in Tuck Everlasting that isn't quite there in the book. But kind of that two different kind of states of being that have this romance through like a whole magical realism storyline. It's a really great book. I love it. I've read it multiple times, and I definitely recommend. Not exactly an immortality story, but it's got that same magical realism feel.
Well, great picks from both of you. And speaking of moving into more adult territory, things are about to get a little spicy on Book of the Mouse Club podcast. We are moving into at least the rated T for teen genre with an out-of-print book that recently took my Twitter account by storm. Runaway Heart by Claire Richmond, published in 1986 from the Harlequin American Romance brand. This novel features an iconic cover of its main characters set against the backdrop of iconic Walt Disney World structures like Spaceship Earth, Cinderella Castle, and Space Mountain. This book has intrigued me for a while, and I was lucky enough to get a used print copy on Thrift Books, so I will read from the back of the book now. Quote, "Love was an act of faith for Barbara. Private investigator Daniel McGuinn appeared to be an open book, but one that shut tight if you tried to read the pages. Barbara Emerson should have been suspicious of a man as elusive as Dan, but instead she hired him for the difficult job of finding a missing person. As Dan's search led them from Baltimore to Orlando, Barbara never questioned her decision or the reason. Dan inspired her trust. Sometimes you had to gamble blindly on instinct and hope that your instincts were right." Unquote. So we have absolutely judged a book by its cover here, because Disney World is not mentioned on the back, but is all over the cover of this book, and we are just so intrigued. It's from 1986, so Disney's Hollywood Studios and Animal Kingdom were not a thing, but we will certainly be visiting Magic Kingdom and Epcot, it seems. For those unable to find a copy, fear not, an electronic copy is available to borrow, and we will share that link on our Twitter. Eric, fun fact, you also found a copy of this book recently.
I just found it. It was kind of weird because I saw your tweet and I had just gotten mine in the mail from Thrift Books. It was one that I was kind of chasing. It's one of those that as a librarian Disney nerd, I need to have on my shelf. So yeah, I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about it.
I am just truly so intrigued as to where this is going to go. So we are stepping outside of, I don't know. I wouldn't call it necessarily our comfort zone, but maybe our normal reads, but it absolutely fits in the wheelhouse of our podcast. So stay tuned for that in March. In the meantime, you can keep up with Book of the Mouse Club on Twitter and Instagram at Book of the Mouse. Email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. And please be sure to leave us a review on iTunes so others may find our podcast and read and listen along with us. You can keep up with me, Courtney, on Instagram at Great Guthsby or on Twitter at Courtney_Guth.
And you can follow me, Emily, at the same handle on Instagram and Twitter at Emily_McD. And Eric, we would love for you to share where our listeners can connect with you and tell us what's up next on Synergy Loves Company.
Yes. So, of course, continuing connecting Disney to everything. I'm going into, I have an exciting special guest coming up who lives in my house and is 8 years old. And we're going to be talking about Disney and some Legos. So it's kind of going in a completely different direction than like what we talked about tonight. But of course, Disney connects with everything. So that'll be exciting. And if you want to catch up with me and the show, you could go to synergylovescompany.com, or you could find me on Twitter at Eric H. Synergy and on Instagram at Synergy Loves Company.
Wonderful. We'll be sure to include all of those in our show notes. And Eric, as a listener of our podcast as well, I'm sure you know that you have the honors of selecting our closing quote. So I'd love to know what you've picked for us.
Yes, I get to do the thing. I'm so excited. I get to do the quote thing. Yay. All right. So mine actually for loving the book more than the movie, I picked a quote from the movie, and I even checked the scene back in the book to make sure there wasn't a similar version of it, but it was said so well in the movie. So it comes from the scene where Angus Tuck is talking to Winnie in the rowboat. We talked about that big pinnacle scene, and he says, "Don't be afraid of death. Be afraid of the unlived life."
An excellent choice. Thank you. I think, even though it's only from the movie, it certainly speaks the book as well. So I know your Synergy Loves Company, but we've loved having you as our company here on Book of the Mouse Club. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Book of the Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.